They told us it was an honor, a sacred privilege, a divine path chosen by the Emperor himself. But when they called my name in that black cathedral choked with incense and promethium fumes, all I felt was cold terror and the iron certainty that I was walking into a furnace built for lies. If you're watching this, you need to understand what they show you on the broadcasts, what the priests chant from their pulpits. It's a mask. Behind it is something monstrous, and it feeds on faith. Stay with me. Like this video, share it, and subscribe. Not because it helps me, because someone needs to know what's real. They called my name, Matthias Vaughn. I didn't react at first. I couldn't. The entire nave of Sanctus Mortis Cathedral erupted in hymns and cheers. Faces I'd known all my life turned toward me with awe, envy, even tears of joy. They touched me like I was already relict, like my skin was sacred. One woman clutched my sleeve and whispered, "Blessed be, brother," before bursting into sobs. I didn't move. I couldn't feel my legs. Confessor Hadrian, massive in his ceremonial armor, stood above the crowd on the pulpit, his augment throat turning each syllable of my name into thunder. His servo skull floated back to him, the lot in its tiny claws no bigger than a scrap of trash. That's all it took to choose me. A name on a crumpled wafer, the path cleared before me. Thousands stepped back like water parting for a blade. I stumbled toward the altar, feet dragging. My mind screamed run, but my body had already surrendered to the machinery of tradition, of fear, of inevitability. I remembered Leanna, her pale face, sweat-slicked and sunken, waiting for me in our tiny hab 3 levels down. The plague had been eating her for 2 years. The rations I scraped from my manufacturing job kept her alive. Barely. Now, with me gone. The priests flanked the altar like vultures in hoods. Hadrian waited, arms spread like he'd already won something. And maybe he had. The rituals mattered more than the bodies they chewed up. My hands trembled as I knelt. The confessor began the litany, each phrase another chain around my ribs. I mouthed the responses. I knew the words. Everyone did. We'd been raised on them, baptized in repetition, sanctified by fear. The scar across Hadrian's cheek twitched as he declared me the chosen of Cassius. The words echoed against black stone walls smeared with centuries of candle smoke and blood. The congregation wept, and I realized they weren't crying for me. They were crying for themselves, for the comfort of believing in a system that demanded flesh to stay standing. Better me than them. The procession began. 2 mini-storm guards took position beside me, carapace armor gleaming, faces hidden behind masks shaped like cherubim. I turned once as they led me down the steps. No one met my gaze. No one offered a hand. Only Hadrian, smiling faintly as the gates opened to swallow me. The monastery of St. Cassius loomed behind the cathedral like a tumor. Its black stone walls were slick with hive condensation, the sigils of martyrdom etched deep into every visible surface. As we passed beneath the rusted gate arch, I felt the last breath of the city's cold air on my neck. Then the iron doors clanged shut, and I was alone with them. Brother Mortian met us in the inner courtyard. His face was a mess of ritual scars, jagged, parallel cuts down his cheeks that oozed slowly, perpetually. Infection was common here, holy even. He said nothing, just turned and gestured toward the stone stairwell that spiraled into the earth. We descended in silence. Every step took me further from Leanna, from the manufactorum, from everything real. The air thickened with moisture, warm and sour. The walls wept. The purification cell was a stone box barely wider than a coffin, a waste bucket, a moldy sleeping mat, and the walls, scratched, gouged, carved with desperate marks left by previous chosen. I read names I recognized. dead names, ghosts. Mordian listed the purification steps without emotion. 7 days of fasting, daily scarification, hourly prayers, meditation, no speaking, no visitors, no hope. He left me with a final warning: this pain cleanses. Resist, and your soul may fail before the ritual is complete. The door sealed behind him. I didn't scream, not yet. Day 1 was hunger, real gnawing hunger that burned like solvent in my belly. My muscles twitched, my hands shook, my throat begged for water. They gave me a single cup, warm, metallic, reeking of minerals. And then the scarification began. Brother Mordian returned with a ceremonial blade. He said nothing as he peeled back my tunic and began cutting. The first sigil went over my sternum, the wings of the aquila, carved deep and clean. Then smaller marks along my ribs, each line accompanied by whispered litanies. I bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. When he finished, he left the blade on the floor. A warning? An invitation? I stared at it for hours, unable to move, to think. Only the burning in my chest, the wet itch of the wounds. I dreamt of Tobias that night, my son. He'd been 8 when the HAB block collapsed. An accident, they said. Structural failure. But I'd seen the reports. The mechanicus had declared it sound just months earlier. I'd been working a double shift to buy extra meds for Leanna. I had missed his last breath. Day 2 brought more cuts. Symbols of Cassius across my shoulders. Devotional lines spiraling down my arms. My skin was a canvas of pain. My sweat stung like acid. The hunger blurred everything. The cup of water was the only anchor I had left. But that night, through the vents, I heard voices. Confessor Hadrian, speaking with his acolytes. They discussed the schedule for my ascension, described the transformation with clinical glee, how my screams would echo for days, how the sanctified machines had already been prepared to receive me. I pressed my ear to the wall. One acolyte mentioned the relic casings, polished and blessed. Another spoke of how each chosen adds to the cathedral's chorus. Jarek Hale, last year's chosen, had been a friend. I'd seen a servo skull that bore his jaw. It hadn't been an honor. It had been a harvest. They weren't saving souls. They were building a choir of the dead. By the 3rd day, the pain settled into something permanent, like a second skin made of needles. The ritual scars covered most of my torso now, crawling up my neck in looping devotional glyphs that bled constantly in the damp air. The raw flesh stuck to my tunic when I moved, when I breathed, when I thought. Brother Mordian never spoke during the sessions. He simply entered, knelt, carved, and left. Each cut was methodical, precise. This wasn't butchery, it was calligraphy. I wasn't a person to them anymore. I was scripture. The hunger was worse than the blade. My stomach convulsed, my vision blurred. The single cup of water they granted each day was no longer enough to stop the tremors in my hands or the pounding in my skull. I dreamed of meat, of spoiled ration paste, of the industrial grease we used to clean the forge presses, anything. But the worst part was the time, the silence, the nothing between each act of ritual violence. There was nowhere for my mind to hide. So I watched the walls. I studied the scratches, the dried blood, the names carved in desperation. I counted 17 that I recognized. Workers, foremen, even one medici assistant. All had been chosen. All had died. Their bodies turned into trophies, their pain recycled into pageantry, and not one of them had ever come back. I thought about Leanna, lying in that dark hab with only the rations I'd hidden in the vent. She wouldn't understand why I hadn't visited. She would think I had finally abandoned her, that I'd chosen the Emperor over her. But I hadn't chosen anything. They chose for me. On the fourth day, I overheard something through the walls that shattered what little control I had left. Brother Mordian was speaking with a guard, casual, unguarded. The wife? She collapsed last night. She gonna make it? He paused. Doubt it. No credits, no meds. She's got a week, tops. The words didn't register at first. They just rang inside my skull, hollow and brutal. She was dying, now alone. And I was locked in a stone tomb, being sliced up to feed a lie. My hands curled into fists, reopening wounds. I didn't care. I wanted to scream, to smash the door until my bones snapped. But I did nothing. Because I knew they'd win. Because that was the point. On the fifth day, Brother Sace came. He was different now. No longer the gruff supervisor who used to sneak allo sticks into shift briefings. Now he wore crimson robes over armor, etched with flame sigils. A redemptionist, fully turned. He led a group of them in chants outside my cell. They sang praises to my sacrifice. They prayed for my purification. They used my name like it was already sacred. He spoke to me through the door, called me blessed brother, told me how proud the line managers were, that my workstation had been turned into a shrine. I vomited into the bucket and wept until I slept. That night I dreamed of Tobias again, but this time he didn't speak, he just watched me burn. On the sixth day, my body ceased being mine. The final symbols were carved into the thin skin along my collarbones and thighs. Mordian worked slowly, reverently. His blade moved with a surgeon's precision, guided more by ritual than anatomy. I barely flinched. Pain had become a constant hum, background noise to the greater horror crawling through my thoughts. When it was over, he handed me a mirror. For the first time since the choosing, I saw what they had made of me. I looked like a parchment sewn from meat and rot. My eyes were sunken, rimmed with yellow. My skin, where it wasn't flayed, hung off my bones. And across every visible inch were the marks of St. Cassius, carved and bleeding, each one a nail in the coffin of Matthias Vaughn. But even then, something refused to die. The part that still remembered Leanna's laugh, Tobias's fingers gripping mine on his first walk, the weight of a wrench in my hand on the manufacturing line. The truth. That part whispered, "You are not a saint. You are a man. And men can still run." That night I couldn't sleep. The air in the cell felt heavier. The walls, closer. I pressed my ear against the stone again, hoping for voices, orders, anything that might give me an edge. What I heard was worse. Confessor Hadrian was preparing the final rite. He described the chamber, the restraints, the machinery. He told the acolytes how to handle delirium, how to control spasms during sanctification. He described removal protocols for the head, hands, and jawbone. Each piece destined for a reliquary, each fragment displayed. It wasn't ascension, it was disassembly. They were going to take me apart, piece by sacred piece, and everyone would cheer. I looked down at my hands, at the blood-caked scars and broken nails. Tools once. Could they still work? Could they open a latch, break a lock, escape? I didn't know, but I was going to find out. On the seventh day, the door opened. Not Mordian this time. A full procession. 2 guards in ceremonial armor. A priest swinging a censer, the smoke sweet and cloying. And Mordian himself, holding the robe I would wear to the altar. "Come," he said. I stood. My legs shook, but they held. The scars screamed with every movement. I didn't show it. They led me through corridors I hadn't seen, deeper into the monastery. The walls here were different, not ancient stone, but ferrocrete, lined with humming pipes and red-lit cogitators. Industrial, functional. I memorized everything, every vent, every hatch, every shadowed corner, because I wasn't going to the altar. I was going out. At the junction, Mordian paused to check a data slate. The guards waited. Casual, ceremonial, not watching. I moved. I drove my elbow into the vent panel beside me. Rust and rot had already weakened the hinges. It collapsed with a screech. I dove in. They shouted, too late. I crawled like a rat, the tunnel tight and slick with condensate. Behind me, boots scraped metal. Voices barked. One fired a shot. It ricocheted off the pipe above me. The pain, the hunger, the blood, none of it mattered. I moved toward the only thing I still owned, my choice. The maintenance tunnels beneath the monastery were never meant for human passage. Narrow, choked with cables and condensation, they twisted through the bowels of Sanctus Mortis like the veins of a rotting giant. I crawled through them blind, my breath ragged, arms trembling with exhaustion. Every movement tore open the ritual cuts along my chest and arms. Blood mixed with rust, sweat stung like acid. But I didn't stop. Somewhere above, alarms began to scream. A high-pitched wail echoed through the walls, and I felt the change in the air. More guards, more searchlights, more prayers shrieked into vox channels. I was no longer the chosen. I was now the heretic. The tunnel eventually widened into an access junction, a square chamber with an overhead hatch and a rusted ladder bolted to the wall. My arms barely worked, but I climbed. When I pushed the hatch open, light hit my face for the first time in a week. I emerged into the lower manufacturum sector behind the supply yards. The scent of ozone, oil, and burnt ceramite filled my lungs. Beautiful and awful. Familiar. I crouched behind crates, my ragged robes soaked and heavy. My heartbeat thudded like a drum inside my skull. I wasn't safe, not even close, but I was free. The streets here were still waking. Early shift workers trudged in silence. Servitors rolled past, dragging carts of scrap. No one looked twice at a bleeding, stumbling man in ceremonial rags. Everyone was always bleeding here. I moved through alleyways and maintenance doors until I reached the back stairwell of HAB block Delta 15. The climb nearly killed me. My legs shook, my vision blurred, but I knew the way blind. I'd taken these stairs every day for 15 years. I reached the door. Our door. It was ajar. Inside, Lyanna lay on the cot, curled under threadbare blankets. The med pack wrappers littered the floor. The ration tray was empty. Her skin was waxy and pale. Fever had set into her bones. She opened her eyes when I knelt beside her. For a moment, confusion, then recognition, then terror. Matthias, you're dead. Her voice cracked like parchment. I took her hand. I ran. She stared at me, at my face, my wounds, my bloodied robe. Tears welled up in her eyes. You'll die for this. I know. She tried to sit, coughed violently, then slumped back. I held her close, felt how light she'd become. I'm getting you out, I said. Where? I looked toward the window. The hive wall was visible in the distance, black against the chemical smog. Anywhere, away. Footsteps echoed in the stairwell. They'd found the trail. I wrapped her in blankets, lifted her like glass. Her breath rasped, shallow and fast. I slipped out the back, down the emergency ladder, into the alley where cargo haulers rusted like bones. One still ran. I broke the lock, started the engine with trembling hands. They hadn't closed the gates yet, and the ash wastes were waiting. The gates of Sanctus Mortis were built to keep the wasteland out, not to keep anyone in. No one ever tried to leave. There was nowhere to go. The ash wastes beyond were a killing ground of wind, poison, and silence. But death out there meant freedom, a death we chose. The hauler rumbled beneath me, its engine coughing smoke as we crossed the final checkpoint. The gate servitor scanned our false code, lifted from an old manifest I'd memorized years ago. The tech priest monitoring the post barely looked up. No one suspected the cargo of a fleeing martyr and his dying wife. We passed through. The gate groaned shut behind us. Gone. The road was a fractured line of ancient stonecrete that stretched into an ocean of gray dust and broken machinery. Rusted mining rigs loomed like skeletal beasts, long dead. The air shimmered with heat and toxins. A sunless pall hung overhead, thick with chemical vapor. This was the true face of Vesperian Prime, stripped of its masks. Leanna stirred beside me, her skin burned. She whispered nonsense through cracked lips, words I couldn't catch. Sometimes she called out for Tobias. Sometimes she simply moaned. I fed her sips of water from a cracked canteen. Not enough, not nearly enough. The hauler's fuel gauge dipped below a quarter. I scanned the horizon, hoping, praying. And then, there, a mining station, abandoned. Its silhouette jagged against the yellow sky, surrounded by rusted conveyors and slag mounds. We reached it just as the engine began to stutter. I parked the hauler behind collapsed scaffolding and carried Leanna inside. The station was dead. Shattered windows, buckled floors, walls scorched from some forgotten reactor fire. But it was shelter. It was enough. I found a corner office with a half-collapsed ceiling and cleared a space on the floor. Laid her down on old cloth. Her breathing was rapid, uneven. Her fingers trembled as they grasped mine. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have run sooner." She looked at me, with eyes clouded by pain. "You came back." Outside, the wind howled through broken vents, and then the sound of engines, low, heavy, organized, gunships. I crawled to a shattered window. In the distance, 3 crimson and gold Valkyries cut across the smog. Ecclesiarchy livery, fast, coordinated, ruthless. They were sweeping the wastes, for me. I held Leanna close as I watched the first searchlight stab across the ruins. They had come to reclaim their sacrifice. But I wasn't giving it back. I pressed my back against the cold, crumbling wall, heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. The faint drip of condensation echoed through the ruins. Small sounds, but somehow louder than the roar of Valkyries circling overhead, hunting for me. Leanna's shallow breaths trembled against my chest, her pale face soft and fragile in my arms. Her life was hanging by a thread thinner than any blade. The Ecclesiarchy's gunships swept the ash wastes like vultures. They were relentless, scouring the ruins for their chosen sacrifice. I could feel their searchlights piercing the broken windows, slicing through the dust-choked air. There was no mercy in their eyes, only the cold certainty that I belonged back inside the monastery's iron grip, where flesh was currency and faith a shackle. I shifted carefully, clutching Leanna's hand. Her fingers were brittle, barely responding to my touch. Every movement tore fresh blood from the ritual scars on my chest and arms. But I pushed through the pain. We had to move. I found a narrow corridor leading deeper into the abandoned mining station. Cold stone walls cracked and blackened by forgotten fires. It was a tomb for machines and memories. But right now it was the only shelter we had. Every step echoed in the silence, each breath ragged and desperate. My mind raced, replaying every moment from the choosing to the escape, the ritual cuts and endless hunger, the screams that would never come, and the truth I had uncovered. We were not saints, we were cattle, flesh to feed a lie. The priests did not save souls, they harvested them. I laid Leanna down on a threadbare mat, pulling a tattered blanket over her trembling body. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding her gaze before recognition and fear took hold. "Matthias, you're dead," she whispered, voice cracking like dry parchment. "No, I said, choking on the words. I ran. Her tears fell silently. You'll die for this. I know, I whispered back, though I wasn't ready to die. Not yet. Outside, the low rumble of engines grew louder. More Valkyries. More hunters coming to reclaim their prize. My breath caught as I moved to a shattered window, watching the crimson and gold silhouettes slice through the toxic haze. They were fast, precise, and utterly merciless. I gripped Liana's hand tighter, promising silently I would protect her, even if it cost me everything. The station was a graveyard of rust and dust, but it was shelter. It was hope. As the first searchlight stabbed through the darkness, I knew the chase had only just begun. The Valkyries circled like death itself, their engines whining through the thick smog, a sound that gnawed at my nerves like acid. Every shadow seemed to twitch with menace, every distant echo a threat. I knew they wouldn't leave without their prize. Me. I pulled Liana closer, her skin burning under my trembling hands. Her breaths came shallow and ragged, like the last embers of a dying fire. I searched the room for anything useful, a broken pipe, a scrap of metal, a weapon. Nothing but debris and memories in this forgotten station. The door creaked suddenly, slicing through the silence like a blade. My heart leapt into my throat. I tensed, muscles coiled for a fight I wasn't sure I could win. But it wasn't them. A figure emerged from the shadows, a scavenger, ragged and cautious. She froze when she saw us, eyes wide and unblinking. "You're the heretic," she said, voice low but sharp. I nodded, too exhausted to deny it. "I've heard stories," she whispered. "The chosen who ran. You're lucky to be alive." I managed a grim smile. Luck doesn't last long. She introduced herself as Mira, a former tech servitor mechanic turned rogue. "If you want to survive, you'll need more than luck. The ecclesiarchy will scour every corner of this place. You'll need a plan." I explained Liana's condition, my desperate need to get her somewhere safe, anywhere but this poison-racked wasteland. Mira's eyes softened, though her jaw remained set. "There's a refuge, deep in the Ash Forge, a community of outcasts and exiles. They take in anyone the Imperium wants to erase." Hope sparked like a fragile flame. "How far?" "Days of travel through the worst of the wastes." I swallowed hard. "I'll take it." Mira nodded, pulling a worn data slate from beneath her cloak. She keyed in coordinates, handing it to me. "This is your best shot, but you'll need supplies, weapons, medical gear." Liana coughed, a harsh, rattling sound that stole the words from my mouth. "We don't have much time," I said. Mira glanced toward the window. The Valkyries had tightened their circle, searchlights sweeping closer. "Come with me," she said. We moved quickly through the station's shattered corridors, dodging unstable floors and rusted machinery. Mira led me to a hidden cache, a forgotten armory, packed with relic weapons, medici supplies, and ration packs. It was a lifeline. I grabbed what I could carry, then turned back to Liana, who was pale but steady. "We leave at dawn," Mira said. "Until then, stay quiet." That night I held Liana close, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. Outside, the distant drone of Valkyries persisted, a reminder that the Imperium's reach was long and merciless. But for the first time since the choosing, I dared to hope. Dawn crept over the horizon, casting a sickly yellow light through the shattered windows of the abandoned mining station. The ash wastes stretched endless and barren, a sea of rust and dust that swallowed every sound and hope. The Valkyries were gone, for now, but the threat they represented hung like a shadow on my shoulders. I lifted Liana gently, careful of her fragile body, and shouldered the pack Mira had filled with supplies. We slipped out the back of the station, moving swiftly and silently through the skeletal remains of machinery and ruined buildings. Mira led the way, her every step sure and practiced. The wasteland was no place for the weak. The toxic air bit at our lungs, and the ground crunched beneath our boots like broken bones. Wind scoured the cracked roads, carrying whispers of old wars and forgotten deaths. Leanna leaned heavily against me, her breaths shallow and ragged. Every step she took seemed to cost her more than the last. I tried to block out the fear gnawing at my mind. Tobias's face haunted me, his small fingers, the last time he smiled before the hab block collapsed. I had failed him, just as I was afraid I would fail Leanna. Hours passed, maybe more. I lost track of time in the endless gray. Mira was a ghost in the dust, leading us toward a distant cluster of ruined buildings marked on the data slate. We crossed through slag heaps and rusted conveyor belts, dodging scavenger traps and the occasional lurking predator. At last, we reached the edge of an ancient quarry where a battered settlement clung to life. Fires burned in old barrels, and figures wrapped in patchwork armor moved cautiously through the rubble. The Ashforge refuge, Mira called out in a low voice, and a guard approached, eyes sharp and wary. After tense moments, we were allowed inside the ramshackle walls. The air inside was thick with sweat, smoke, and the scent of worn metal. An elder woman greeted us, her face lined with years of hardship and wisdom. She looked Leanna over and motioned to a makeshift Medicaid tent. "We'll do what we can," she said, "but you came far with her like this." Days blurred into nights as the community worked to stabilize Leanna's condition. They had little to spare, but what they offered was better than the cold cruelty of Sanctus Mortis. I stayed at her side, whispering stories of better days, promising a future free from the lies that had nearly claimed us both. But the Imperium's shadow was long. One evening, as the sun dipped beneath the ash clouds, a scout returned with news that chilled my blood. Ecclesiarchy patrols were tightening their net, scouring nearby settlements, hunting for heretics and escapees. The Ash Forge was no longer safe. I looked down at Leanna, her breathing shallow but steady for now. I clenched my fists, a burning resolve igniting in my chest. If they wanted me dead, if they wanted to tear us apart, then I'd show them what it meant to fight for life. I would protect my family, no matter the cost. The Ashforge refuge had become a fragile sanctuary, a brittle ember flickering against the overwhelming darkness of the Imperium's reach. Every face in the settlement carried the scars of survival, some worn like badges, others hidden deep beneath layers of distrust and silence. I kept to the shadows, moving between the tents and barricades with careful steps, all the while planning our next move. Leanna's fever had broken, but she remained weak and pale, her body betraying every effort to heal. The Medicaid supplies here were barely enough to hold her together. Mira was my anchor, a fierce survivor, whose eyes burned with defiance. She had stories of escapes and skirmishes, of lives clawed back from the brink. When I confessed my fears, she only shook her head. They think they control this world because we're afraid. They don't know what we can become. That night, while Leanna slept under the dim light of a flickering bulb, I listened to the distant rumble of gunships. The Valkyries had returned, sweeping closer to the refuge. I felt the old terror clawing up my spine, but I refused to let it consume me. I spoke quietly with Mira. "We can't stay here. We need to disappear. Go deeper into the wastes. Find something no one else has." She nodded. "I know a place, an old mining complex long abandoned and hidden beneath the ash dunes. It's dangerous, radiation, old defense systems, but no patrols go near it. If we can reach it, you and Leanna might live." The plan was madness, but it was hope. The next morning we packed what little we had. The people of Ashforge watched us go with a mixture of pity and envy, knowing full well the odds stacked against us. We slipped away just as the Valkyries darkened the sky above the settlement. The air was thick with tension, every shadow a potential threat. The journey across the ash wastes was brutal. The wind tore at our clothes, and the sunless sky pressed down like a lead weight. Each step forward felt like wading through a sea of despair. Leanna's condition worsened by the hour. I carried her when she couldn't walk, whispering promises of safety, of a future beyond the lies and pain. Her fingers curled weakly around mine, a fragile lifeline tethering me to the person I refused to lose. One evening, as the cold settled over the wastes like a suffocating shroud, we encountered a patrol, crimson robes echoing the grim fanfare of the ecclesiarchy. Their faces were masked, their weapons raised without hesitation. Mira moved first, drawing a rusted laser gun from beneath her cloak. "Run!" she hissed. I hesitated, torn between fleeing and fighting, but Leanna's fragile frame in my arms left no choice. We broke into a desperate sprint, dust and ash swirling around us as gunfire echoed behind. A lasbolt grazed my shoulder, burning through fabric and flesh. Pain exploded, but I didn't stop. The cliffside ahead offered cover, jagged rocks, perfect for disappearing into the shadows. We dove behind the crag, hearts pounding, breaths ragged. The patrol passed, their voices fading into the distance. We were alive, but barely. I looked down at Leanna, tears mixing with the ash on her cheeks. "Hold on," I whispered. "We're almost there." The mining complex lay ahead, half buried in ash and silence, a forgotten tomb or a sanctuary, depending on what we made of it. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a flicker of hope. The mining complex yawned before us, a cavernous wound carved into the ash dunes, its steel bones twisted and rusted, half swallowed by decades of neglect and dust. The entrance was a jagged scar, barely visible beneath collapsed girders and sagging catwalks. I eased Leanna down, her weight nearly crushed by exhaustion, and forced open the rusted hatch. Inside, the stale air clung to us, thick with the smell of oil, decay, and something older. Forgotten promises buried in the dark. Flickering emergency lights sputtered to life as I triggered the ancient control panel, showering the chamber in a ghostly red glow. The silence pressed close, broken only by the distant drip of water and the faint hum of power long starved of use. I laid Leanna on the floor and wrapped her in the thin blanket I carried, cradling her fragile form as she shivered. We were safe, for now. I spent the next hours scavenging what I could. Broken Medici vials, ration packets brittle with age, and a sealed, emergency stim injector. It wasn't much, but it was enough to slow the fever's advance. As night deepened beyond the reinforced bulkheads, the oppressive quiet was shattered by the echo of boots, heavy, mechanical, methodical. The ecclesiarchy was hunting us still. The Valkyries had relayed our escape coordinates. There was no doubt. I grabbed the broken laser gun Mira had given me and crouched in the shadows, heart hammering. The first figures appeared at the entrance, a squad of redemptionists, their armor scarred and pocked with signs of zealotry. They moved like ghosts, their voices chanting low prayers in the ancient dialect of the Imperium, words meant to sanctify death and damn the living. One stepped forward, a priest in crimson robes, eyes blazing behind his helmet's visor. "Matthias Vaughn," he called, voice cold and certain. "You have forsaken your sacred duty. Repent or be purged." I stood slowly, the weight of my battered body anchoring me to the last thread of defiance I possessed. "This isn't forsaking," I said, voice raw. It's fighting for what's left of my family. They advanced and I fired. The laser gun hissed, a red streak slicing through the stale air. One redemptionist fell, his armor smoking and shattered. The others roared, charging forward. Blood mixed with ash as we clashed, the cavern echoing with the brutal symphony of combat. Metal on metal. Prayers shouted over pain and my own ragged breath. Lyanna stirred, weak but alive. Her whispered prayers a beacon in the darkness. In the end, I stood alone, battered and bleeding but unbroken. The last redemptionist fell at my feet, and silence reclaimed the complex. I dragged Lyanna to the narrow exit, the first light of dawn piercing the gloom. Outside, the wasteland stretched endless, a gray ocean of ash and ruin. There was no salvation here, no sanctuary from the Empire's cold grip, but there was freedom. I looked down at Lyanna's pale face, the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. "We're free," I said. "No matter what comes next, we're free." Together, we disappeared into the wasteland. Two broken souls clinging to the last ember of hope in a world built on sacrifice and lies. Before you believe what they tell you, listen to someone who lived through it. Like, share, and subscribe. Someone out there needs to know what the Emperor's grace really looks like. They called my name, Matthias Vaughn. At first I thought I'd misheard, but then the nave erupted. Cheers, hymns, arms raised skyward in feverish gratitude. I stood frozen, no feeling in my legs, no air in my chest. I knew what this meant. We all did. The chosen of Cassius, a fate wrapped in gold leaf and agony. People touched me as I passed, reverent like I was already sainted. One old woman kissed my hand. Another wept openly, whispering, "You'll save us all." No one understood what they were celebrating. Or maybe they did, and were simply glad it wasn't them. Confessor Hadrian towered at the altar, draped in red and bone, flanked by hooded priests. His voice thundered through his augment throat, repeating my name as if invoking a rite more ancient than mercy. A servo skull hovered at his side, its bionic claw still gripping the scrap of parchment with my name. That was it. That's all it took. The walk to the altar felt endless. The floor of Sanctus Mortis Cathedral was slick with the wax of 1,000 candles and the blood of 1,000 more. I could hear my heart pounding like a forge hammer, could taste the copper of fear on my tongue. I thought of Lyanna. 3 levels down, in our rust-riddled hab unit, wasting away beneath sweat-soaked blankets. I worked double shifts in the manufactorum to keep her alive. Barely. Now they were taking me, and with me, the only thing standing between her and the grave. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body moved on its own, guided by years of indoctrination. Reflexes trained to obey the voice of the ecclesiarchy. I knelt at the steps of the altar, the confessor's shadow falling over me like a shroud. He spread his arms. Behold the flesh of sacrifice, the bone of salvation, chosen by St. Cassius himself. The congregation sobbed, overcome by shared delusion. The incense was thick now, promethium and myrrh, holy smoke hiding rot. I mouthed the responses. I knew them by heart. We all did. They taught us to pray before we learned to read, and that's when I saw it. Brother Jarek's jawbone, mounted in the reliquary, polished, gilded. He'd been last year's chosen. They'd told us he'd ascended, but he hadn't. He'd been butchered, harvested. And that's when I understood. The burning man is not born. He's built. The monastery of St. Cassius loomed behind the cathedral like a tumor growing from sanctified rot. Its surface was black stone slick with condensation and old blood. The gate groaned open with a sound like breaking bones, and the last breath of the hive's cold air kissed my neck, before the iron slammed shut behind me. Brother Mordian was waiting. His face was a patchwork of ritual scars, raw, weeping cuts that never fully healed. Infection, they said, was sacred. He didn't speak, just turned, and I followed him into the bowels of the earth, down stone steps slick with moisture, past rusted iconography and walls that pulsed with humidity. The air thickened with each level, till it felt like I was breathing through cloth soaked in oil. He stopped in front of a cell, a coffin of stone, barely enough space to kneel or lie flat, no light, no warmth, a bucket in the corner, a ragged mat, and the walls, carved with the madness of those who came before me, scratches, blood, names I recognized from the manufactorum, all dead, all ascended. Mordian finally spoke, voice thin and dry like flaking parchment. 7 days of silence, fasting, scarification, meditation, no questions, no visitors, no mercy. He placed a blade on the floor, a long ceremonial knife, polished, then sealed the door behind him. The silence hit like a slap, a total, absolute absence of sound. My breath felt too loud. My heartbeat a betrayal. Day 1, hunger. The ache came fast, a clawing hollow burn that started in the stomach and spread to the limbs. I shook, my teeth chattered. My sweat smelled like rust. They gave me 1 cup of water, warm, metallic, and tainted with something mineral. It did nothing but keep me conscious. Then came the blade. Mordian returned, silent, and began the work. He peeled back my tunic and carved the aquila into my chest, each wing precise, each cut slow. Blood rolled in warm rivulets down my skin. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. When he finished, he left the blade on the floor again. Was it a warning? A test? I didn't touch it. I couldn't move. That night I dreamt of Tobias, my son. I saw him as he'd been, 8 years old, grinning, covered in grime. The way he looked the morning the HAB block collapsed. The mechanicus said it was an accident, structural failure. But I'd seen the pre-clearance. I'd seen the signatures. He died alone, while I was working double shifts for ration credits. The dream shattered me. When I woke, the aquila on my chest had dried, cracked, infected. And day 2 was just beginning. Day 2 began with blood. Not just mine, though there was plenty of that. The second scarification went deeper. Mordian returned with his blade and a basin of something that smelled like rust and vinegar. He said nothing, just knelt and resumed his work as if I were a scroll to be etched. He carved the sigil of Cassius across my shoulders, twin spirals descending into glyphs I didn't recognize. Then, down my ribs, each stroke a prayer, each cut a declaration that I no longer belonged to myself. By the end, I couldn't lift my arms. My tunic clung to me like wet meat. When Mordian left, he took the blade this time. No illusion of choice now, just endurance. The cell stank of rot and copper. My sweat burned. My breath was shallow. I tried to pray, out of instinct, not faith, but the words felt like ash in my mouth. And then I heard them. Voices, through the vent above the cell. Hadrian's voice, cold and smooth like oil on water. Ritual complete by end of week. Sanctified transfer ready. Skull matrix already consecrated. Another voice. The jaw or full cranium? Hadrian chuckled. Jawbone, keep the teeth. He's young, clean. They were talking about me, about my parts, like I was a machine to be broken down, a sacred harvest. Jarek Hale's name came up again. He'd been my friend. They used his voice in a hymnal servo skull last week. It sang psalms in the manufactorum, hovering over the line where we used to work. That wasn't transcendence. That was puppetry. That was theft. I pressed my ear to the wall. One of the acolytes asked if the relic casings had been blessed. Another said, The cathedral needs more song. I realized then they weren't saving souls. They were building an orchestra of agony, a choir made from suffering, from us. By the third day, I no longer trembled. The hunger had become a companion, silent and sharp, the pain a rhythm. The wounds on my chest and shoulders wept constantly, mixing with my sweat into a paste that stung every time I shifted. Mordian returned with new glyphs to carve. I didn't flinch, not because I was brave, because I was empty. He etched devotional lines across my arms, symbols I'd seen in old liturgies, holy texts used to justify torment. My body had become scripture, every inch of me a sermon in blood. The water they gave me tasted of iron now. I drank it anyway. There was nowhere to hide, not even in sleep. When I closed my eyes, I saw Tobias again, this time silent, watching. And behind him, Leanna, face gaunt, eyes hollow, reaching for me through fire. I woke screaming. No one came. Day 4 broke something inside me. I woke to the sound of whispering, real, not imagined. Voices just beyond the vent again. Mordian speaking to a guard with the ease of someone who'd long stopped pretending this place was holy. The wife? The guard asked. She collapsed last night. A pause, a sound like static. She gonna make it? Another pause. Then, doubt it. No credits, no meds. She's got a week tops. The words didn't make sense at first. They floated in the air like dust motes, too light to be real. But then they landed, heavy, suffocating. Leanna was dying, now alone, in the dark, and I was locked in a stone coffin, bleeding for a lie. I pressed my hands against the wall, smeared it red. I wanted to scream, to break the door, to claw my way out through sheer hate. But all I did was sink to the floor, shaking. They were going to kill me and let her die, because they could. Because that's what the system was built for. I didn't eat that day. Not that there was anything to eat, but I refused the water. Let the pain crest, let it drown me. If they were going to erase me, I wanted to remember what it felt like to hurt. By midday, the room spun. My wounds throbbed like an extra heartbeat. I started hallucinating. Metal doors opening where there were none. Leanna's voice calling my name from the stone. Tobias laughing from inside the walls. And then the singing began. Not hallucination, real. Brother Sayus. He had been my supervisor once, before he was redeemed. A rough man with a low-stick habit and a crooked smile. Now he stood outside my cell in crimson robes, leading a group of zealots and chants that bled through the stone like poison. Praise the chosen, bless the pain, sanctify the vessel. They called me sacred, holy, said my workstation had been turned into a shrine. They didn't say what happened to the man who replaced me. Say spoke directly to me then. Matthias, he said, voice syrupy with false warmth. Your sacrifice uplifts us. You give us purpose, strength, glory. I vomited into the corner bucket and curled up against the cold wall. The blade cuts on my ribs had begun to swell. One had turned black around the edges. That night I dreamt of Tobias again, but this time he didn't smile. He didn't speak. He stood in fire, watching me burn, his eyes full of questions I couldn't answer. On the 5th day, I ceased to be a person. I woke to find my limbs numb, my breath shallow, my mind wrapped in gauze. The pain had evolved. It no longer screamed. It whispered, constant, intimate, impossible to ignore. Mordian arrived early. His robes were darker today, heavy with incense and stiff from dried blood. He didn't greet me, just knelt and began the final sequence. The skin over my collarbones was so thin he had to be careful not to puncture the arteries. He worked slowly, reverently, etching thin devotional lines into the muscle itself. When he finished, he moved to my thighs, peeling away flesh like parchment to carve the seals of suffering. I felt none of it, not because I was strong, because I was gone. He handed me a mirror, and for the first time since the choosing, I saw what they'd made of me. A parchment of meat, a ruin. My eyes were sunken, ringed with yellow, my lips cracked and black. The glyphs carved across my body glistened with infection and blood, symbols of St. Cassius layered atop one another like prayers muttered over corpses. I stared for a long time. Then something flickered. Not strength, not hope. Something smaller, sharper, memory. Liana's laughter when the lights flickered and we made shadow puppets on the ceiling. Tobias's tiny hand wrapped around my finger on his first night home. The ache in my back after a 16-hour shift. But knowing they had food, the smell of solar, the weight of the wrench in my grip, I was not sacred. I was not chosen. I was a man, and men could run. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The cell was too small, the walls too close. My heartbeat had returned, loud now, urgent. I pressed my ear to the stone and waited. The voices came again, Hadrian's this time. Ensure the restraints are secured, he said. He's close to delirium. Remove the jaw quickly, preserve vocal cords. We need clean sound. An acolyte asked about the hands. Flens them post-mortem. Treat with sanctified alkali. No staining. They weren't going to kill me. They were going to take me apart. Piece by sacred piece. I pulled my hands into my lap and looked at them. Scarred, cracked, filthy, but not useless. Not yet. They'd built me into scripture, but I could still write my own ending. I waited, heart pounding in the silence like a war drum. The shadows in the cell thickened with the passing hours, and every scrape of the stone door, every whisper from the corridor outside felt like a scream. The last remnants of my will gathered, like dry leaves in a storm. I was a husk, bleeding and carved, but inside something stubborn refused to die. When the guards came, they did not speak. Two hulking figures, faces hidden behind rusted helmets and cages of bone. Their hands were cold iron, but they trembled, perhaps with their own dread or a trace of pity. I clenched my jaw, tasting blood and grit. They approached with the mechanical precision of death, armed with clamps, knives, and chains sanctified by the ecclesiarchy's darkest rites. The ritual would begin, the disassembling of a man, piece by sacred piece. But as they moved to bind my wrists, I acted. I slammed my head back against the cold stone wall with all the force I could muster. The guards staggered, one grunting in surprise. It was not much, but it was enough. I scrambled to my feet, limping but fueled by a surge of raw panic and purpose. The cell was small, but every inch was a battleground. I shoved one guard into the wall, knocking a breath from his lungs, then grabbed the ceremonial blade Mordian had left behind. It was sharp, blessed by blood and madness. The other guard charged, but I swung. The blade bit deep into his forearm and he screamed, a sound more machine than man, distorted by Vox implants and agony. He fell back, clutching his wound. I stumbled through the door, thrown open by my struggle. The corridor was dim and slick, but I didn't stop. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I ran. Behind me, shouts rose, bells of alarm in this sacred hell. I ran toward the light, toward whatever mercy might be left outside these walls. The corridors twisted like the veins of some ancient corpse, the damp stone slick beneath my bleeding feet. Every breath was ragged, every heartbeat a hammering countdown. I could hear the echoing clatter behind me, shouts in ecclesiarchal chant, boots pounding like thunder. Brother Mordian's blade felt heavy in my hand, slick with dried blood and sickening weight of ritual. I kept it ready, a shard of defiance in the darkness. I passed alcoves lined with the statues of saints and martyrs, their faces twisted in silent agony. Their hollow eyes seemed to follow me, accusing. This place was a tomb, and I was the unworthy interloper trying to flee his own damnation. "Stop him!" The voice of Confessor Hadrian roared behind me, amplified by his augmetic throat. "He's the chosen. He belongs to Cassius." But I didn't belong. Not to them. Not to any god or god-forsaken system that turned men into relics. I burst through a heavy iron door and found myself in the lower manufactorum, a cavernous chamber of grinding machines, dripping pipes, and clouds of choking smoke. The stench of burnt oil and human sweat was thick enough to choke on. I ducked behind a conveyor belt, my chest heaving, vision blurring. My hand trembled as I held the blade, waiting, hoping the shadows would swallow me whole. But fate was cruel. From the gloom, 2 hooded acolytes appeared, chanting in low, metallic tones. Their voices were like the drone of funeral bells. They moved fast, hands crackling with electro-whips and sanctified tasers. No way out. I lashed out with the blade, managing to slice one's forearm again. But the other caught me with a shock that seared through my ribs. My knees buckled and I dropped, teeth clenched against a scream. Hands grabbed me, hauling me upright. My blood slicked the floor beneath us. "Sacred flesh resists," hissed one, voice like broken glass. I spat at them, eyes burning with fury. "I'm no sacrifice, I'm a man." The acolyte sneered. "A man is nothing but a vessel. You will serve." But I had other plans. With a desperate surge, I headbutted the nearest one, sending him staggering back. I slipped from their grasp and ran, bloodied, broken, but not beaten. I heard the cathedral bells toll far above, a mournful, relentless dirge for those already lost. But I was still alive, and still fighting. The manufactorum's grinding machines belched steam and ash like the lungs of a dying beast. I staggered through the smoke, senses sharpened by pain and desperation. Every step was agony. The cuts on my arms and chest burned like acid, and the scarification felt like fire searing beneath my skin. But I had to move. The cold metal walls seemed to close in, crushing the very air. Somewhere deep inside the maze, a faint hum vibrated, the pulsing heart of the Mechanicus's forge. I knew if I could reach it, I might find something to turn the tide. Ahead, the shadow of a massive cogwheel spun slowly, creaking on its ancient axles. I ducked beneath a hanging chain, nearly slipping on the oil-slicked floor. Then, suddenly, a voice, soft, familiar, laced with desperation. "Matthias?" I froze. Liana. Impossible. I scrambled toward the voice, ignoring the fire clawing at my lungs. She emerged from the gloom, eyes wild but shining with fierce hope. "Liana, you're alive." My voice cracked. She nodded, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Barely. They left me for dead, but I found a way out." "We don't have time. They're coming." Behind her, a small group of broken souls, others discarded by the system, survivors of the hidden horrors beneath the cathedral. Faces gaunt, eyes haunted, but burning with rebellion. "We've been watching," she whispered. "They're harvesting more than bones. The chosen are puppets, flesh for their machines, and you're next." I looked down at my hands, scarred, bleeding, a map of pain. "We need to destroy the reliquary," she said, voice trembling. "It's the heart of their power. Without it, the system collapses." My mind reeled. The reliquary, the sacred shrine where they kept the bones and skulls of the ascended, the source of the cathedral's twisted worship. "If we burn it," she said, "maybe we can end this nightmare." I nodded, fury flooding my veins. For Liana, for Tobias, for every man and woman crushed by their lies. We moved silently through the shadows, past rusted pipes and shattered icons, till the distant glow of candles flickered ahead. The reliquary chamber. Inside, a chorus of hymns echoed, the voices of priests and acolytes, drunk on their own delusions. Lyanna and the others took their positions. I gripped the ceremonial blade tight. There was no turning back. The heavy oak doors to the reliquary groaned like a dying beast as we pushed them open. Flickering candlelight spilled out, casting long shadows that danced against the cracked walls. Inside, the chamber was a cathedral of horror. Rows of gilded cages hung from iron hooks, each containing fragments of flesh and bone, relics of the past chosen. The air was thick with incense and something far fouler, decay. At the center stood Confessor Hadrian, his red and bone robes glowing in the dim light, surrounded by hooded acolytes, chanting in tongues older than the city itself. His servo skull hovered like a malignant spirit beside him, its bionic eye scanning the room. "You shouldn't have come," Hadrian said without turning, voice cold as a tomb. Lyanna stepped forward, voice steady. "This ends now. You won't harvest another soul." Hadrian laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Foolish woman. The burning man is eternal. His pain is our salvation." A chorus of chants rose as the acolytes drew ritual knives, the glint of blades reflecting the flickering flames. I felt the pain in my chest surge, the glyphs throbbing like living wounds. But I was no longer the man they wanted me to be. I stepped forward, blade in hand. "Your lies end here." The acolytes surged. Steel clashed with bone and ritual flesh. Lyanna and the others fought with desperate fury, using whatever they could find. Broken tools, scorched candles, even bare fists. I focused on Hadrian. He moved like a shadow, quick and cruel, augment throat roaring as he summoned prayers of fire and decay. But I was fueled by something he could never understand. Love, rage, the fierce will to survive. I dodged his strike, slashing the air and drawing a line of blood from his cheek. His eyes flared with anger. "You will burn for this heresy." The chamber trembled. The reliquary pulsed, a dark heart beating with stolen life. Lyanna screamed, "The reliquary, it's reacting." We saw it then. The bones and flesh inside began to glow, the holy relics awakening with unnatural power. The air thickened, charged with sacred energy and corruption intertwined. We had to act fast. I lunged at the reliquary, driving my blade into the altar beneath it. The metal hissed and steamed. A violent explosion of fire and shards erupted, throwing us back. Flames consumed the chamber, a holy pyre fueled by ancient sin. Hadrian's scream echoed as his power shattered. The reliquary burned, its bones cracking, its power dying. We collapsed outside the cathedral, coughing on the thick smoke. Lyanna looked at me, tears streaking her dirt-streaked face. "It's over, for now." But in the distance, I heard the cold grind of servitors, more horrors coming. The war wasn't finished, not yet. The cathedral lay in ruins behind us, flames licking the night sky like the last dying breath of a god. We didn't wait for more. Lyanna grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the narrow alleyways of the hive. The shadows swallowed us whole. Every step was agony. My body screamed beneath the carved flesh, the infection spreading like wildfire. But adrenaline numbed the worst. We ran past gutted hab units, abandoned manufactorums, faces twisted in fear and disbelief watching the chaos unfold. But the hive was no refuge. Alarm klaxons blared. Voxcasters shouted warnings in every dialect. Servitors and zealots swarmed like locusts, the Emperor's grace twisted into a sentence of death. We slipped into the labyrinth of tunnels beneath the city, old maintenance shafts, forgotten catacombs, places where even light feared to tread. Lyanna's breathing was ragged, her face pale under grime and exhaustion. Matthias, we can't keep running. I swallowed the pain, voice low. We have to find the resistance. They'll help us. She nodded, eyes filled with a flicker of hope. But hope was a fragile thing. We reached the resistance safe house, a forgotten sanctuary, beneath the ruins of a shattered chapel. Inside, faces turned toward us, some familiar, many strangers. Among them, a grizzled woman stepped forward, Commander Rhea. You brought hell with you, she said, voice hard as shattered glass. I met her gaze. I'm done being the chosen, she nodded slowly. The Emperor's church will come for you and for us all. Night stretched on as we planned. Maps sprawled on tables, whispered strategies, the distant howl of pursuit never far away. Lyanna rested against a cracked wall, hand pressed to her side where the fever burned beneath her skin. I held her close, promising silently that we would survive. Because if the burning man was built by their hands, then he could be torn down by ours.